North Carolina has reduced tax rates in 4 of the last 6 years while building its savings to the highest level in history. Savings to taxpayers since 2011 is estimated at roughly $15 billion. Now, because of North Carolina's success and our economic growth, other states are now looking to North Carolina as a model. Joe Coletti is Senior Fellow for the John Locke Foundation. He studies the numbers intently. He joins us now for a look at some of the keys to sustainable budgets and taxpayer relief. Joe, welcome back to the program.
Glad to be here.
An important note that you constantly drum into us here at the John Locke Foundation is that North Carolina's success over the past few years is not just about tax reform, and it's not just about restrained spending. You say those two things together are really the recipe for success.
Yeah, first part of anything budget related, whether it's a state or your family, is that you have to keep spending below what you have the money coming in. And so for North Carolina, that comes down to we have restrained spending over this time, slower spending growth, which allowed not just the tax reforms, but also some more opportunity to set aside money in the savings reserve account, the rainy day fund for the state. And by doing those things, not only does it help the state government and prevent future tax increases, it also creates margin in the economy for the economic growth that we've seen and for the communities to kind of take care of themselves and for civil society to be able to expand, because the first thought is not, what is government going to do to fix this problem? So that's where sustainable budgeting is that it keeps government restrained and allows the community to succeed and now and in the future.
And families and workers are keeping more of what they earn, so there's that individual impact of the past few years' policy decisions. And also, you mentioned the rainy day fund. Boy, did that come in handy when, unfortunately, we were hit by several big-time hurricanes.
Yeah, it's because of the restrained spending, because the legislature had the commitment to low spending over these years, and they were and set aside some of that in savings. There was $2 billion available last year when Hurricane Florence came through, and they were able to use $750 million of that to take care of hurricane relief and recovery efforts that would not have been there otherwise. And that's still, and so now it's a question of how do we rebuild that instead of what do we do now?
Joe, you have been talking to other think tanks and other elected officials around the country who are looking to North Carolina. They see what the numbers are. They see that so many people want to move here because there's so much opportunity. And they've been saying to you, okay, how did North Carolina do it? So you put together some key areas that you think other states could follow to try to achieve the same type of results. We've talked about a couple of those, that restrained spending and also the tax reform coupled together. But one of the things that you say is that it's necessary to have a conservative revenue forecast. Tell me what role that plays in all this.
Legislators and governors like to spend money that they have there. I mean, we all want to, if we have money available, we look for how do we spend that, right? There's the money burning a hole in your pocket.
Right.
And so a conservative revenue forecast, especially when you have a balanced budget requirement that is as strict as North Carolina's is, means that the legislature and the governor at the start of the year are working from numbers that are going to hold that spending impulse in check. And for the last few years, North Carolina has been averaging about 2% more revenue than had been forecast. And whereas there are other states in the country, Kansas, Iowa, and a few others, where revenue forecasts exceeded what they actually brought in at the end. And so in the middle of the year, they had to go back and start making adjustments. We have not had to do that in the same way.
You mentioned something interesting, and it's one of your key points to making sure that you can sustain your budget, have taxpayer relief, and be on sound fiscal footing. The strict balanced budget requirement.
Right.
Tell us about North Carolina and how we differ from other states.
Yeah, so North Carolina's balanced budget requirement most states have something like it on their books. But usually it's about the governor has to propose a balanced budget. The legislature has to pass a balanced budget. But once the budget is enacted, in most other states, the restraining factor of how the governor responds to lower revenues is very constrained. So in Iowa, there's only so much that the governor can do. They have to be across the board cuts, and then you have to dip into rainy days, and then you have to dip into savings. In Kansas, the budget director and the Secretary of Administration are responsible for providing lower spending. Here, it's on the governor, and here it has to come from spending, and there's no restraint on how much can be cut or how the cuts have to be made. The governor just has to, at the end of the year, make sure that revenue has exceeded what we spent.
Now, what we see at the federal level when we get into the whole budget situation is you'll have one side saying, we want to spend X amount and here are our priorities. You've got the other side of the political aisle saying, no, 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 we want to spend this much and our priorities are different. And we've seen these successive actions of threats to close down the federal government. Does that happen in state government, or do we have something that prevents that?
That used to happen fairly often in state government, but in 2016, the legislature passed something that says that if on July 1st, the start of our fiscal year, there is no budget bill that has been passed, then the existing budget that's already in place that we've been operating under for the past 12 months just continues on with some small adjustments. But that means that we don't have the threat of a government shutdown anymore. The question is, do we continue at the same level, or do we come together, legislature and legislators and governor, and come up with a new level? But there's not a 0 and 1 choice. It is a level or a higher level.
Now, you've talked a lot about spending and trying to restrain that, but that's not the only thing that we do with money when it comes to public money. We also borrow money. And in your 7 keys to sustainable budgets, you talk about debt limits. Why is that important?
One of the things that the fastest growing part of the federal budget is debt payments. And for many other states, they've taken on debt and have adjusted how they take on debt in unsustainable ways. And so we have some problems with unacknowledged obligations, unfunded obligations, but the practical debt that we have in North Carolina, the debt only goes to capital. There's no borrowing to continue the operation spending, which is a huge difference from many other states. And the amount of debt that can be taken out is limited to the debt service. The payments for interest and principal are limited to 4% of the general fund. And so when you say you can only borrow to this amount, it puts restrictions on not only the total amount that's borrowed, but what interest rate you borrow at. And so that allows, that means that as interest rates go up, there's less availability to borrow. And that means that when you're not borrowing money, you're not having to spend money to pay off last year's spending. You're just worried about what we're spending this year.
Now, Joe, I know that when you put together these 7 keys to sustainable budgets, that you were looking to offer some advice, some educated advice to other states who are looking to spur some economic growth in their states. But of course, we have North Carolina legislators right now and the governor who are trying to work out the next operating budget for the state. What is your number one recommendation to those folks to try to keep things in line and make sure that we continue what we've seen in North Carolina?
Yeah, the biggest thing right now is maintaining that commitment that had been demonstrated between 2011 and 2017 that kept spending growth at about 2.6%. The legislature last year got a little ahead of itself, I think, and spent more than that. And this year the governor is looking at a lot more than that. And so in order to keep it sustainable, we have to keep that spending growth low.